Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Books, Beer, and Networking. We have Jackson Bubbles here, my co-host, and I'm your host, Rob Kohansky. So, what do we got lined up today?
Rob, today we are talking about Mastery by Robert Greene. And
Mastery.
I was just riffing. You just had it.
I set you up, man. I was like, save it for when I hit record. I mean, it's a good book. I mean, I always tell people, it's like in this group, there's going to be books that you like. There's going to be books that you can't put down, and there's going to be books that you're going to want to put down. And that's just the way it is. With Mastery, it was one of those books. I get it. That's one of the books I'll keep going back to. Cover to cover, probably not so much. But I look at, the different phases, being in an apprenticeship, being that creative active and that mastery. And, as we were talking a little bit earlier, it's like, I go through my life and I've been through those phases multiple times. It's just not one time.
Yeah. Constant re-envision. And we always have, hopefully, we always have the next thing, right? I think it was Michelangelo that said, Dear Lord, please don't let me accomplish everything I want to. Always give me that next thing to be working toward. And boy, Mastery is one of these books that I could talk about for a long time because it just spells out over and over again. And maybe that's part of the challenge, Rob, is that there's so many stories in this book about different people and how they've lived their lives. But a lot of these folks who have made really big impacts on our culture and society have had to fail over and over and over again. And oftentimes in this apprentice stage, there's the 3 stages to learning any skill. The apprentice, you had mentioned the second one. I lost it.
It's creative active.
The creative active, and then mastery. So on the front end, a lot of these things, it's a lot of effort without much results, and certainly even if you are getting results, there's not much praise, and people aren't going to believe you that you're able to do the things you say you want to do, or that you've actually accomplished the things you have, because it's so early on. But once you move into that second phase and that third phase, not only are we taking the craft of which we're mastering, but we're also mixing that with the other things that we've mastered before, or the things we're currently working on. And as you talked about, always being in different stages and different areas of life of being an apprentice or really starting to get into something, and ultimately mastering it. So one of the things that really is intriguing me about this book is the life task, and how Robert Greene talks about so many of these people have just felt like this is what they needed to do, or this was important to them, or this is how this is what they were meant to do. And even if it doesn't always look right on paper or make sense, Temple Grandin, someone who had autism and was able to figure out how to make cattle feel most comfortable in a slaughterhouse, right? Like who would ever choose to study that or choose to figure that out? But she had this connection with animals, and she felt that this was her way to serve. It talks about Calatrava in here, right? He did the art museum on the lake.
That's right.
And his whole process of discovering art is it's never finished, and it can always be better. And how can we blend, function and nature, and an absolutely remarkable building that he built, but thousands and thousands and thousands of sketches, and it's never good enough. And some of these things give me solstice, because I feel that way about my own life sometimes too, right? Like it just isn't there's always that next thing that we want to work on, but it's reassuring to know that I'm not the first person who's felt that way about their craft.
Oh no, and it's like it's just not the craft too. It's nice, you talk about being an apprentice. I was a apprenticeship. I had an apprenticeship for was it a tool and die maker back out of high school. So I mean, that's one thing to do. Is like they always talk about the job aspect, the business aspect of it, but you got to look at the family aspect of it. Being a father, being a brother, being a family member. There's some mastery to that as well. So I mean, if we just go through life dysfunctional like we usually do and just do what we do, there's room in there to be a mastery at some point as well.
Oh yeah, I mean everything we do can be done with intention or can be on autopilot.
Right.
And I think reviewing And that's one of the things I love about this book club, Rob, is, everyone gets something different out of these books. And for some people, this is a heavy one. There's books that we pick up where I'm like, I don't know, this seems a little bit thin or on the surface or whatever. Like, I'm not so sure that this might be too high level. But then you take some really basic ideas, you're like, oh, that makes sense. And then we have something like a mastery, which really digs into things, but at its very base level, it's just the idea of if you want to do something big, you're going to have to fail a lot, and you need to know why you're doing it better than anybody else. Because when it doesn't go well, you're not going to have almost none of us have a cheerleader that's consistently saying you can do it, like keep working on it. So unless we know what's driving us and know that we're going to run into some dead ends and it's on us to figure it out, when we find these basic truths, we can take away and act on those. But we all know about it. It's just really nice to be reminded. And I think this book does a good job of telling a lot of different stories of reminding us those lessons.
What it really comes back down to is the stories. I mean, if you look at the stories, you find one that resonates with you, and it's like, well, if he or she can do that, I can do that too. It's just finding one of those stories that relates to you, and showing that they're no different than you or me. They just went out there and had found their purpose and chugged away at it and just kept plugging at it, and just went through that time. They took it time to learn, and then to be active and experimental with what they're doing. It usually takes several years to do some of this stuff, man. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight.
Oh,
was it the old days? It was like 10,000 hours or 7+ years.
Right. If you're looking at 40 hours a week, a 50-hour work week, 10,000 hours, which is the base level of mastery, that's 5 years of a full-time job as we do it in America here. And I think one of the most interesting things about this is it's not the mastery over one subject that really sets these people apart. It's the mastery over several different ideas that they clash their ideas together and make these idea babies that are even better than what happened before. Henry Ford, yes, he had to understand putting together a car, right? He had to understand the manufacturing of it, but he also had to understand the value of having the assembly line and the value of changing how things are supplied. He also had to understand labor. He also had to understand business. Like, these are all these different areas. He wasn't just good at the manufacturing side of it, of let's put this car together quickly. There were so many other things that had to go into it. And, we learned about how his business fell apart and his investors left and said, hey, we can't, this is a lost cause. We're out. And where everyone else would have been frustrated, Henry Ford said, well, this is great. I just had someone pay for all my mistakes, and now I can go out with my own money and build what I think will actually work. And then shortly after that is when the Model T came around. And there's story after story after story. I'm just looking at the back of the book here. I mean, Ben Franklin, Alexander the Great, Freddie Roach. I didn't know who Freddie Roach was, but he trained Manny Pacquiao. He's one of the best, just knows so much about the world of boxing and how he studies for just these little ticks, right? Like this one thing the boxer does that lets on what his next move is going to be. And hours and hours and hours of studying allows him to understand the one thing that gives him his fight is an advantage. This is a big one for me. I'm glad that we could cover this, Rob. And I'm also excited that on the back end here we also have some books that are a little bit thinner that should be quicker reads, but also I'm sure are going to share a lot of those basic truths in ways that are easy to understand, in ways that we haven't necessarily looked at or contemplated before. So I know you talked about we have a Ryan Holiday book coming up, and Ryan Holiday was an apprentice of Robert Greene. Yeah. So when we get into what's that one? The True Believer later this year.
No, it's the Growth Hacker.
The Growth Hacker.
Growth Hacker Marketing.
Thank you. True Believer is also one that we have on the docket too this year, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
So
some good stuff on here.
A lot of exciting reads coming up here. We will be back in person as soon as we are allowed to be. But until then, we are bringing everything virtual with opening up a beer at 4 o'clock on the third Thursday, wherever you are, and talking about some books that are getting us thinking and hopefully giving us some actionable steps to make ourselves and our businesses stronger. So the upcoming book that we have is This is Marketing by Seth Godin. We are going to be covering that on the 21st of May. And we're going to have a Zoom link out on the Facebook page to be able to jump into that call. This is Marketing.
21st or 28th? The third? 1, 2.
Third.
All right.
21st.
So 21st. I'm counting with my toes.
So 4:30, jump on that call. And this is a book that I just uncovered this year. This is one of Rob's recommendations. I love Rob's recommendations because these books bring a lot of really solid truth and just help me to, anytime that you get a suggestion that's outside of what you would read typically, you're going to open up your mind to a different way of thinking. And Seth Godin is wonderful. He's really got me thinking about how would I do things, because that's typically the way my clients would want things to be done. So being sure that my story is in line with this is what I believe, this is how I would act, and hopefully my clients will feel the same.
That's awesome. That's good insight there, Jackson. So we're going to wrap this up. I have just a little quote here from Winston Churchill. Yeah. Success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. So think about that. I mean, it's really, you got to go out there and really get out there and do it. We're all going to fail. It's how you rebound, get back up, dust your shoulders off, and get back at it. So I'm your host, Rob Kohansky. We'll look for his podcast. And then we have Jackson Boobwolfs with Elevated Insurance.
Insured differently, everyone.
Insured differently, everyone. Until next time, guys, thanks for listening.
Cheers.